Don Carrigan joining us again with a little more analysis. Don, I know we talked to you earlier about the flag, the state flag, and we just saw some of the results coming in so far. No is leading, which you were thinking it might be.
Yeah, just based on only anecdotal comments from people over time on that. In fact, I'll get back to this in a minute, but my little town of South Bristol, which has 1,000 voters roughly, and had about a 73% voter turnout, which is pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
There's only a 5-vote difference between yes and no on the flag. Looks like they approved it, but only by 5 votes.
That's amazing.
All those other questions were lopsided, but not the flag. So if that's happening in most of the other communities in the state, it's not a surprise.
Well, and that said, we just heard from Betsy and Garrett, our political analysts, about kind of this changing political landscape, and you said that's something we're really seeing in these small towns.
Well, it is, and particularly in chunks of Maine. When I was a kid, which is a darn long time ago now, but even when I was a young reporter, which is also a darn long time ago, certain parts of Maine, the coast of Maine, most of it was rock-ribbed Republican. Portland wasn't, but most of the coast, hard, solid, old-line Republican. The inland places, the mill towns in particular, St. John Valley, other places, were just solidly Democrat. You could depend on it, and an awful lot of that over the years has flipped as the economics have changed in those areas. People have moved out, people have moved in. The coast, where I am, is now dominantly Democrat. That doesn't mean that some Republicans don't win, but there was a time when everybody in the legislature from that part of Maine would have been Republican. And now most of them at the moment, are Democrats. My town went for Kamala Harris pretty strongly by a couple hundred vote margin, and other Democrats too. And so it's interesting as we see in the unfold in the legislative races, which, as we talked earlier, can sometimes defy those political conventions, what happens. But we also talked, and Betsy and Garrett have commented too, that some of the mill towns, Millinocket, Rumford, Skowhegan, which at one time would have been thought of as staunchly Democratic, nowadays generally vote Republican. So all of that, everything is flipped on its head. A lot on the coast, I think, is because new people have moved in over the decades. And some of those mill towns, people have, the mills have gone away, things have declined, people have moved out, all of that. So it's seen a big change. And the voter preferences respond to that.
We've heard some from voters this election season that it feels like candidates aren't clearly on the Republican or Democrat side. They're trying to appeal to a larger crowd. Is that part of that changing landscape? Is that part of the way they're campaigning?
Well, it could be. It could be a piece of it. I mean, voters of all candidates rather have always known, I think, that particularly if they're Republicans, that because they were fewer in numbers than the Democrats and even the independents. So in a lot of cases, to be really successful, you had to broaden the appeal. And Democrats certainly learned that as well, because there was at one point where there were more independents than members of either party. That shifted over the last 5 or 6 years, and the number of independents has dropped, the number of Republicans in particular has grown, but party enrollment in general has increased. But anybody successful, especially if you're running for a major office, you have to be able to pull in votes from all sides.
That's key.
I want to talk quickly about a petition, a voter ID petition.
Yes. Voter ID has been a big issue nationally and has been an issue in Maine over time. There have been multiple bills in the legislature over the last 10 or 12 years to require voter ID. Those have not passed, and there was a referendum petition drive started a couple of years ago that didn't really get anywhere. Now there's a new one. There was somebody at my polling place today, there was somebody collecting signatures to put on the ballot requiring voter ID, We had that story recently in the Maine Wire about an investigation showing some illegal immigrants having voted in recent years in Maine, and certainly the overall immigration controversy nationally that's been a big issue for Republicans. So it's not surprising that they would bring voter ID back if they can get enough petition signatures. That would presumably go before the legislature this year or next, and then eventually go before voters. New Hampshire passed voter ID half dozen years ago, so they have it now. So it'll be interesting to see if they can get enough signatures and what happens with that.
All right, Don Carrigan, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for being with us.